If you're not sure what parallel processing is, or you are and you're not sure if you're using it right, this video is for you. We're going to cover everything about parallel processing, when to use it versus when to use serial processing, and some practical tips for when and where to use it. This video is a part of a 30-day music production course that I just dropped a couple weeks ago. It's everything I've learned in 10 years, narrowed down to 30 days, in 17 hours of content. It's absolutely fire. And for my subscribers, it's half off, so it's under 50 bucks. So if that's something you're interested in, the link's in the description. Let's get into the video. This is another one of those things that is really going to help kind of separate a professional mix and professional music from amateur music. This is one of those big steps like compression, where it can really like change the quality of music dramatically. So if you're unfamiliar with what parallel processing chains and sends are, they're all essentially the same thing. And we're going to go over them now so you can kind of get an understanding of what they are and how to use them. So there's two different types of processing we're going to talk about. There's parallel and there's serial. So serial processing basically means you're going directly in a line. So we have like our original sound here, we're going into some sort of processing, and then we're coming out, and that original sound went through the processing unit, and now you have that processing on it on one sound. So parallel processing is different because what you're doing is you're splitting the signals. So you have your original sound coming in, and you have the affected signal on one channel, and then you have the original sound that's preserved, dry, in other words, so it's not affected at all. So the reason why we would use serial or parallel processing in certain situations is serial processing, you can think of it as destructive, where you're affecting the full sound. Whereas parallel processing, think of it as having your cake and eating it too. So not only are you adding the processed signal, but you're also maintaining the dry and original signal. Kind of elaborate on this a little bit more so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. So the benefits of parallel processing is maintaining the integrity of your original sample while adding more. Maintain presence while still using spatial effects, adding numerous effects that do not affect each other, and basically having your cake and eating it too. So an example of this would be when using reverb, we know that reverb pushes stuff back. However, we still want to use reverb on our elements that are in the front to give it space and to give it depth. That would be an ideal time to use parallel reverb, because what's happening is you have your dry signal, so it's still right in your face. And then we also, in addition to the dry signal, have the wet signal, which is kind of pushed behind it. As opposed to if we put a reverb unit directly on that track, then it's pushing the whole track back. So that's an example of when we would use parallel processing. Another example would be if we want to maintain like our clean drum signal, but we also want to add like a little bit of razzle or a little bit of saturation on it. We can use parallel saturation so we can maintain the original integrity of the sample while adding the flavor. And then probably the most popular form of parallel processing is parallel compression. If we want drums that are snappy, so like have a lot of transient, and we want drums that are like really thick, that's a time where we would use parallel compression, because what we can do is we can blend the compressed signal, so we can just super over compress the drums so they're like flat, and then mix that in with the signal of the drums that are transient heavy. And now again, we're having our cake and we're eating it too. We have that transient, that snap of the drum, but it's not thin because we also have the body. So parallel processing is a super beneficial tool to kind of use and have in your toolbox. Using chain is parallel processing. So what we're doing anytime we have a chain is we're splitting the signal. So chains is a feature in Ableton Live that allows you to parallel process anything, as well as parallel process numerous times and in different ways on each track. So what happens is you create an audio effect rack. So in order to do this, you can group a device or group an effect. And then if you right click where it says drop audio effects here, you can create a new chain. And then you're, again, going back to this example, you're now splitting the signal here. So you're having one signal going one way and one going the other way, and they're going on their own paths and getting processed in their own way, and they're meeting back up at the track and the head of the track. We can process on these chains as many times as we want. So not only can we put like reverb on, but like now we don't want the lows of the reverb. So now we can toss an EQ, and as long as it's on that chain, it's only going to affect that certain chain. So chains is honestly like one part of Ableton that makes it so desirable. Basically parallel process anything and have as many chains as you want. This is also a way where we can make stuff big. So if your sound is like sounding weak, instead of layering a bunch of different processing on them, and that can really kind of like bring your track to life. So benefits of using serial processing is you can affect other effects, so you can basically affect in a row. You can also do this with parallel, but you're pretty much affecting every effect you put on is affecting everything previously. And then you have the ability to push things back in the mix or bring them up. So like we just talked about, destructive or a serial reverb is going to push something back, as to where serial saturation is going to bring everything to the front. So that's kind of a time when you would use serial processing. And again, it's destructive, so it's basically you are no longer maintaining your original signal. So sends is essentially the same thing. So these are, like I was mentioned at the beginning of this, these are all kind of one and the same. And so how sends work is when we have these little dials here on our track, and then we have our send tracks. And basically, just as the name entails, we are sending part of this signal into this track. And here we have a totally wet reverb, so 100% wet. And then we're just increasing how much of that full wet signal we are bringing in. So we have, again, the dry signal, and we're pushing a little bit out, splitting it into a reverb send, which are meeting back up at the master. So we have those two different signals. So let's take a second to kind of look at some of these principles we're talking about. So let's grab like a synth shot or something. Let's grab a snare, make it easy. Little quick snare. So if we were to put reverb directly on this, that snare is now far away from us. Whereas if we take this off and just push this into the reverb send, so we're getting the dry signal, so the snare is right in front of us, and we're putting it in a space, we're hearing the back, like all the reverb behind the snare. So really a huge difference. To kind of demonstrate some chains, so what we would do is, say we wanted to like create a reverb and like a dry chain. So we're going to come in here and Command G to group the reverb. And now we have this little tab over here. And this is what's going to allow us to add chains. So this little dial right here, if you can see it, we click this, and then we right click down here, create chain. So we're now splitting the signal just like we saw. Turn this down a little bit. And you kind of have to be responsible for these volume levels here, because if these are both at 0, it's going to crank our volume up way louder. And we want to come out essentially the same as we went in. So that's something to keep an eye on. There's actually a Max for Live plugin I've been playing with that kind of monitors these. Let me see. Chastic slide. So this increases one as it decreases the other. I think it's free. I'll link it in the description. But anyway, so yeah, now we have these two signals, and the cool part is we can come in here and create as many as we want. So let's say we want, not only do we want a reverb and a dry chain, but let's say we want a reverb chain or a delay chain. Grab a delay. Let's use this one, whatever. And we could pan them too, so we can have reverb on the left, delay on the right, dry signal in the middle. So as you can see, just by like showing you guys a couple chains in this way, you can see how much we can do with chains and how much cool stuff. So we can do like a reverb throw. So we can come in here and like automate how much reverb. So this is a good way to automate a track. And yeah, so audio effect racks are super powerful. And then we can come in here and we can map any of these parameters we want to these macros. So let's say we wanted to map like the amount of reverb to macro 1. Now we have that available to us right here. You can actually also, so you can add as many macros as you want, or you can just have one. You can save the effects, so you can take this little camera here and it's gonna save everything the way it is. And then another cool feature of chains is you can go to chain and you can actually fade these into each other or map these however you want. So like we can scroll through this chain here. This is actually what they're talking about when they say chain. And we can switch effects. So now they're not layered like, let's say like, let's map this to macro 2. And this allows us to scroll through the processing, which is pretty neat. So I'm scrolling through these different chains of reverb, dry, and cluster delay. So overall, super powerful. We can randomize these if we want. Audio effect racks are like one of the best parts about Ableton, in my opinion. So to kind of recap, parallel processing, chain, sends, it's essentially all the same thing. We're just splitting the signal and processing it in different ways while maintaining the dry signal, whereas parallel is going directly on the track and is destructive. So these are a couple ways you can utilize in your own workflow to create depth and maintain the integrity of a signal. And again, this is one of those little things that's really going to separate your music from everybody else's. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next module. Mark.